I would buy a property, I would rehab it, I would rent it, I would refinance it. Then I just repeat that again, right? And it's like, oh, you're doing the BRRRR method. Oh, it's a name for this. I'm like, okay, this just was the smart thing to do.
The BRRRR method. Sean, give us the tea on this. Explain this. What is this?
Yeah, so Brian, thanks. The BRRRR method. Funny story is I never even knew what the BRRRR method was. I was talking to one of my mentees and telling them how to get involved in real estate investing. And I was telling them how, I would buy a property, I would rehab it, I would rent it, I would refinance it. Then I just repeat that again, right? And it's like, oh, you're doing the BRRRR method. I was like, the who? He said the BRRRR method. I'm like, oh, like somebody named Burr like discovered this method. He's like, no, Sean, BRRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. I'm like, oh, it's a name for this. I'm like, okay, this just was the smart thing to do. And so that's what I did. I didn't even know what the name was. So like I said, again, BRRRR method is just a short acronym for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. So that's what the BRRRR method is.
Great. Okay. So let's talk through each step. So in terms of buying, walk us through that.
Yeah, so buying is really the most important in that step, the BRRRR method. You have to buy it correctly. When I say buy it correctly, you have to buy it at the right price. You have to buy it at a price that's going to allow you to be able to do what you need to do to it and still walk away with a profit and with a scenario that's going to allow you to refinance it, which is basically kind of like the fourth step. And so if you don't buy it at the right price and you don't know how to come up with, a rehab budget, then you could get stuck. So buying it at the right price, negotiating and just understanding your numbers up front is extremely important. Like that's step one. If you don't buy it correctly, then you could be in trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. And then what are some typical things for buying that people kind of like some common pitfalls, I guess people run into?
Yeah. So one thing that I've seen in this market is anxiousness, right? And when I say that is everybody wants to get in, everybody wants to get their first deal, and so people are paying more than what they should pay for it. And so with that being said, they're losing out on the opportunity to make this work. And some people have gotten stuck with properties where they couldn't refinance because they bought it at too high of a price. And so you got to be patient. Sometimes you got to wait for the right deal. It's important to wait for the right deal, as a matter of fact. And so that's probably the biggest thing I've seen is not to be anxious. One of my mentors says like, hey, look, he says, Sean, look, I pray about everything and worry about nothing. He said, like, I'm not going to be anxious. I'm like, oh, I got to use that. Right. And so I would say that's one of the biggest things to do is to be a little patient, especially for your first deal. Don't just jump on the first thing smoking, and just understanding your numbers and having access to like a real estate professional or a mentor or somebody or a coach or somebody that's done it before that can lead you down the right path.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Those are wise words from your mentor.
Yes, indeed.
Let's go on to rehab. So walk us through this.
Yeah, so the rehab would probably be the next most important piece of the BRRRR method. Obviously, you got to buy it at the right price. And then you got to rehab or renovate, whatever you want to call it, rehab the property and renovate it, right? And so the importance of that is making sure you have access to contractors and individuals that can give you a good price, that can do quality work, that understand the different rules and permitting and so forth when it comes to renovating a property. And having good workmanship is important. Like, the old saying, you get what you pay for. It's definitely alive and well in the rehab business. Like you have people that are quote a real low price, but you go get a crappy product. And if you get a crappy product, everybody's going to know it. The renter's going to know it. The bank that's doing a refinance is going to know it. Anybody that's connected to that property is going to know it. So it's important to make sure you're working with solid contractors, people that have done these type of situations before, worked on properties and have a good name, and they also have great workmanship.
Okay, so how do you find the right people to do the rehab, to do the construction, to do the work? Because I know that's always like a struggle for people. It's like, well, who do I hire? Like, I don't even know where to start. Like, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, so man, that's like the $1 million question, man. It's a little tricky, right?
Yeah.
And so, the relationships I have, they're built over years, just dealing with these individuals, vetting them initially, and then dealing with them. But one of the main ways to start is obviously to get a recommendation from somebody that you trust, whether it's a mentor or a friend of yours that's, already doing it. That's usually the easiest way, a recommendation from somebody that you know. Secondly, another good way is to get involved at your local real estate investors meetups, right? What I mean by that, these are just meetups where, investment organizations, they have one maybe once a month. I know like here in this area, they have it about once a month. And so you get there and you start talking to other people and talking to them about their experiences and ask them to give you some recommendations. Say, hey, I hear that you say you're rehabbing properties, you're doing rentals and flips or what have you, you have a good contractor that you can refer me to. And the way things are now, to be honest, Brian, is there's such a shortage on good contractors and laborers that a lot of people aren't really super excited to, even introduce you to their contractors.
Yes.
Their contractors can't even keep up with the work that they have for them. And so, that's just going to be it just is what it is. Supply and demand is really unbalanced right now. And so, but really connecting and reaching out to someone within the real estate, investing meetups. And just, just continue to ask until you get some answers and get the right one. And so that's a really, really good resource. That's probably one of the main ways that, like, either a referral from somebody that that's doing good work, or, these real estate meetups. Those are usually the main two ways. And then the third way is, if you go into some of these home improvement stores like a Lowe's or Home Depot, you see guys that are in the flooring aisle or the tile aisle or the plumbing aisle, just start talking to them, having conversations with them and say, oh yeah, I'm doing this, that, and the other. I'm looking to get into this. Do you do this? And, the only problem with that is obviously you can't vet them people. It's a little hard to vet them, but I've met some good contractors that way as well.
Yeah. It's another way to get introduced.
That's right.
To somebody to see if their work is worthy.
That's right.
That up to par of what you're going for. So.
Yes.
Awesome. That's a good tip. I never thought about
that. That's right. I've done it a lot, and I would say somebody like myself that's been doing it for a long time, it's easier for me to do that because I know the questions to ask, I know the vetting, I know what to look for. But even with my experience, it's you don't get it right 100% of the time. So I wouldn't advise a newer person to kind of start out that way, because you got to kind of get a feel for how all of this works and how workmanship works and prices and how they should do a project. Then it's easier for you to ask that individual more questions.
That makes sense. Okay, and let's go on to renting. So this is like this is the money, the cash flow.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, renting and the cash flow is important, especially when you're talking about the next step, the refinance, because in order for you to refinance it, the bank wants to see that the property is making money. And so that's probably the next important thing, really, to be honest, is the rent, how much you can get for it. So that's something that you need to know up front. You need to know, hey, once I fix this property up, what price could I possibly rent it for, right? And so you're going to know all of these things before you even pull the trigger to buy it. So, you always have to know this up front before you even purchase it. You're going to have an idea of, you know what you're going to pay for it, what the rehab costs are going to be, and you need to know what it could possibly rent for once it's fixed up, right? And then, once you know that, you want to have the access to the ability to be able to screen these renters. Any mentor can connect you with a source that can screen these tenants. So that's going to be super important for you to be able to screen the tenants, get the right tenants, and make sure that these tenants can pay on time, make sure that they have the income, make sure they have like a little bit of assets, they have the down payment. to get in the property, make sure they don't have any evictions on their record and so forth. And so you definitely want to understand how much you can rent it for, but then secondly, have the ability and understand that you have to know how to screen these tenants, because if you get a bad tenant in this property, it won't be any refinance, and it definitely won't be any repeat. You won't be able to do, the next two steps if you get a bad tenant in the property. So that's going to be extremely important, making sure you get the right tenant, once you kind of know what the monthly rent is supposed to be.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense in terms of renting out to the right people. That's I'm sure that's always a challenge, or just having to be patient maybe sometimes.
That's right. Absolutely.
Because you don't want to just like whoever the first person.
Oh, you got to be patient. Like that's the thing that trips up most newer investors, especially, you're trying to put a tenant in there. They get a little anxious. You spent money to buy the property. You spent money to rehab the property. Now you anxious, because you got monthly payments that you're making and you want to get somebody in there. But trust me, those monthly payments are nothing compared to, what it's going to cost you if you put a bad tenant in there. Because not only is the tenant not going to pay you, they're going to tear the property up too, So you got to figure out a way to sacrifice and make that payment, even if you got to make that payment for a month or two extra, as opposed to, rushing to put a bad tenant in the property.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let's go on the refinance part. So a lot of people, they get kind of like tripped up on this. Like walk us through this.
Yeah, so the refinance part is probably the more complex part of the whole equation, right? Because you got to understand and know what the bank is looking for. And so all of that goes right back to the beginning of what I said. One of the most important pieces is buying at the right price. So you have to buy at the right price. And then once you rehab, your rehab budget has to be right, because what's happening is the bank is only going to refinance, most banks are only going to refinance up to a certain amount. And on average, most banks are financed up to 80% of the value of the property, so just using a basic scenario, right? If you bought a property for, $50,000, right? And you fixed it up, it would cost you $10,000 to rehab it. So now you're all in that property, $60,000, right? And so when you go to the bank is going to run what they call, comps and market analysis and so forth, and see what the property appraises for. The property might appraise for, let's say for instance, if the property appraises for $100,000, right? Using that scenario, the most the bank is going to lend on that property is $80,000, and basically saying 80% of the market value. In real estate terms, they call it ARV, the after repaired value. So if you ever hear ARV, that's just a fancy acronym for after repaired value, right? And so the bank is only going to loan 80% of the market value. So if it's 100,000, they'll loan 80,000 on it. So if that 80,000 and you bought the property for 50, and your rehab, costs were 10,000, so you in it all in 60 for 60,000 all in, the bank is going to give you 80,000. So you're basically going to walk away with 20,000 in your pocket, right? And so, but you have to make sure that the numbers are right. You got to buy it right. You can't overdo it on your budget with repairs. You got to know what the ultimate market value is going to be after you renovate it. So all of those things are done on the front end, understanding your numbers on the front end. Really, this BRRRR method is a reverse engineer, reverse engineering the deal, understanding like if I pay this and it costs me this to fix it up, and the rent should rent for this, then I could refinance. You got to know what the bank is looking for. And that's, basically the nutshell of it is the bank is not going to lend more than 80% of the value. So you got to know like, hey, if I want to be able to get some cash out of this property and use that cash to buy another one, the goal is for the property to appraise for way more than what, I have into it. So that same scenario, like I said, the property appraised for 100,000 and the bank loan up to 80,000. You want it where the property would actually appraise for more. Because if the property appraises for more, then the bank is basically going to give you more money. In that same scenario, if the property appraised for 120, the bank will give you $96,000 on it, right? And if you only have 60,000 into it and the bank gives you 96, then you walk away with 36,000. You use that 36 to repeat, buy another property. That's it. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. So, but you got to be able to get the money out, and you got to do everything right to be able to repeat the process. If you screw up anywhere along the line, you may not be able to repeat, and you'll kind of be like, stuck in this little twilight zone for a while where you can't really make a move to another property unless you come up with your own cash.
Mm-hmm. And then you'll see good deals pass you by.
That's right.
You're like,
no doubt. I'm telling you.
Gotta
be in position.
Yes, that's super important. That was so good. So yeah, that was like big picture kind of finishing off.
The repeat is pretty self-explanatory, but I guess what I would probably want to impress upon people is the goal of a repeat is to make sure that when you refinance, that you can get as much out of it as you possibly can. That's the goal, because you can use that money that you get as the down payment and put, some of the other money in your bank account. So that's the goal. The goal is to kind of like create money out of nowhere, create a situation where there was no equity and there was no cash in the property. You want to create equity in each property as you go along, and take that money and be able to take it to the next property and put some in your bank account.